The August sun blazed mercilessly over Provo, Utah Territory in 1878, turning the small wooden kitchen into an oven. But Natalie Owens barely noticed as she stirred the bubbling pot of wild plums, her mind wandering to the empty plot beside her late father's house, where she hoped to plant apple trees come spring. She had been bottling preserves since dawn, the counter lined with mason jars waiting to be filled, each one representing another small victory against the harsh winter that would inevitably come. Her father had died 3 months ago, leaving her the modest homestead and a stack of debts she was determined to pay. At 22, she had refused every well-meaning suggestion that she sell the property and move back east to live with relatives she barely knew. This land, this house, this life was all she had left of the man who had raised her alone after her mother's death in childbirth. The preserves would sell well at the general store, she knew. Mrs. Henderson had already promised to take as many jars as Natalie could produce. It was honest work, respectable work, and it kept her hands busy enough that she did not dwell too long on the loneliness that crept in during the quiet evening hours. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a sticky trail of plum juice across her skin. The heat was unbearable, but she had learned that summer's abundance required immediate attention. The fruit would not wait for cooler weather, and neither could she afford to waste a single plum from the wild trees that grew along the creek bed. A knock at the door startled her so badly she nearly dropped the wooden spoon into the boiling pot. Visitors were rare, especially in the middle of a weekday afternoon. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and pushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear before crossing the small main room to the door. The man standing on her porch was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his work shirt. His hat was dusty from travel, and his boots showed the wear of someone who spent more time in the saddle than on foot. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking blue-green that reminded her of the mountain lakes her father used to take her to when she was young. "Miss Owens?" he asked, his voice deep and unexpectedly gentle. "Yes," she replied cautiously, one hand still on the doorframe. "Name is Ethan Dalton. I worked for your father last summer, helped him build that new section of fence on the south property line. I was passing through town and heard about his passing. I wanted to pay my respects, if that would be appropriate." Natalie felt her guard lower slightly. Her father had mentioned a cowboy who had done good work, though she had been visiting a friend in Salt Lake City at the time and had never met him. "That's kind of you, Mr. Dalton. My father spoke well of you." Ethan removed his hat, holding it respectfully in both hands. "He was a good man. Fair and honest. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Owens." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like some water? You look like you have been riding in this heat." "I would not want to trouble you, madam." "It's no trouble." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Please, come in out of the sun." He followed her inside, and she noticed him glancing at the rows of jars on the counter, the pot still bubbling on the stove. "You have been busy," he observed. "Preserves," she explained, moving to the pump to fill a tin cup with cool water from the well. "The plums were ripe, and I cannot let them go to waste." He accepted the cup with a nod of thanks and drank deeply. When he lowered it, she saw him studying her face with an expression she could not quite read. "You are managing the property alone." "I am." She lifted her chin slightly, prepared for the inevitable lecture about a woman trying to handle a homestead without a man, but he only nodded again. "That is hard work. Your father would be proud." The unexpected words brought a sudden tightness to her throat. She turned back to the stove quickly, blinking against the sting in her eyes. "The plums will burn if I do not attend to them. Of course, I should be going anyway." He set the empty cup on the small table and moved toward the door, then paused. "Miss Owens, if you need any help with the property, repairs or such, I will be in the area for a few weeks, working at the Garrett Ranch just north of town. I would be happy to lend a hand, no charge. Consider it a debt to your father for his fair treatment." She turned to face him, surprise clear on her features. "That's generous of you, Mr. Dalton. Just seems right." He settled his hat back on his head. "You know where to find me if you need anything." After he left, Natalie returned to her preserves, but her mind kept drifting to the unexpected visitor. There had been something in his manner, a quiet steadiness that reminded her of her father. Most men who came around since her father's death fell into two categories: those who looked at her property with calculating eyes, and those who looked at her the same way. Ethan Dalton had seemed genuinely concerned about her welfare, nothing more. She finished bottling the plums as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains. 23 jars sat cooling on the counter, their contents glowing ruby red in the slanting light. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before starting to clean the sticky residue from the stove and counter. The next morning, she loaded a crate with a dozen jars and walked the half-mile into town. Provo was growing steadily, with new buildings going up every few months as more settlers arrived. The general store sat on the main street, its false front painted a cheerful yellow that had faded to a softer shade under the relentless sun. Mrs. Henderson's face lit up when Natalie entered with her crate. "Oh, wonderful, dear. I sold the last of your strawberry preserves just yesterday. Mrs. Martin said they were the best she had ever tasted." Natalie felt a warm flush of pride as she arranged the jars on the counter. Mrs. Henderson examined them with an approving eye, then counted out the agreed-upon payment. It was not much, but it was honest money earned by her own labor. "Will you have more next week?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "I will. The chokecherries should be ready by then." "Perfect. You know, dear, you have quite a talent for this. Your preserves are becoming well known." As Natalie walked home, coins jingling in her pocket, she allowed herself to feel hopeful. If she could keep this up through the harvest season, she might be able to make a real dent in the mortgage payment that loomed over her. She spent the afternoon in her small garden, pulling weeds and watering the vegetables that would see her through the winter. The work was satisfying, grounding her in the physical reality of survival. Each tomato that ripened, each bean that swelled on the vine, represented security. 3 days later, she was picking chokecherries along the creek when she heard a horse approaching. She turned, shading her eyes against the morning sun, and recognized Ethan Dalton riding toward her on a sturdy bay gelding. He reined in and tipped his hat. "Morning, Miss Owens." "Mr. Dalton." She noticed he carried a toolbox strapped behind his saddle. "I had some time before my shift at the ranch, and I remembered your father mentioning that the chicken coop needed some repairs. Thought I might take a look if you are amenable." She hesitated, pride warring with practicality. The chicken coop did need work. Several boards had rotted through, and she had been putting off the repair because she lacked the proper tools. "I could not ask you to do that for nothing." "You did not ask. I offered." He swung down from the saddle with easy grace. "Besides, your father helped me out of a tight spot once. This is just settling accounts." "What kind of tight spot?" My horse threw a shoe just as a storm was rolling in. "Your father not only let me shelter in his barn but helped me fix the shoe once the weather cleared. Would not take a cent for it." He smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face. Said a man who would not help a stranger was no kind of man at all. Natalie felt her throat tighten again. That sounded exactly like something her father would say. "All right," she agreed quietly. "Thank you." She returned to picking berries while he worked on the coop, but she found her attention drawn repeatedly to the steady sound of hammering. There was something comforting about having another person on the property, she realized. Something that eased the constant vigilance she had maintained since her father's death. When her basket was full, she walked back to the house and set about preparing the berries. She was elbow-deep in her work when Ethan appeared at the door. "Coop is fixed up good as new," he reported. "Reinforce the roof too, should hold through the winter." "Come in and wash up," she said impulsively. "I was going to make lunch anyway." He looked surprised but pleased. "I would not want to impose. You fixed my chicken coop. The least I can do is feed you." She prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken left from her supper the night before. They ate at the small table, and she found the silence comfortable rather than awkward. When they finished, he helped her clear the dishes without being asked, pumping water for washing while she dried. "You are making more preserves," he observed, nodding at the pot she had prepared. "Chokecherries this time. They make a tart jelly that people seem to enjoy." "Your father mentioned you had learned preserving from your mother's recipe book. Did he?" She felt a pang of bittersweet emotion. Her father had rarely spoken of her mother, the grief too raw even years after her death. "I never knew he told people about that. He was proud of you. Talked about how you had taken to it, how you had a gift for knowing just the right amount of sugar, the perfect cooking time." Ethan leaned against the counter, his expression soft. "He worried about leaving you alone, but he said if anyone could manage, it would be you." Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. She turned away quickly, but not quickly enough. "I am sorry," Ethan said quietly. "I did not mean to upset you. No, it is just—" She took a shaky breath. "No one has told me things like that, what he said about me. Everyone just offers advice or tells me what I should do differently. No one mentions that he believed in me." She felt his presence beside her, solid and warm, though he did not touch her. "He did believe in you, very much." They stood in silence for a moment, and then she wiped her eyes and turned back to face him. "Thank you for telling me that. You are welcome, Miss Owens." "Natalie," she said, "if you are going to keep fixing things around here, you might as well call me Natalie." His smile returned, slow and genuine. "Only if you call me Ethan." After that, he began stopping by regularly. Sometimes he would arrive with specific repairs in mind, other times he would simply ask if there was anything she needed done. She found herself looking forward to his visits, to the steady competence with which he approached every task, and to the easy conversation that had developed between them. He told her about growing up in Wyoming, the youngest of 4 brothers on a cattle ranch. His family still lived there, working the land his grandfather had claimed decades ago. He had left 2 years ago, not out of any conflict but from a desire to see more of the territory before settling down. She told him about her childhood in Provo, about her father's work as a carpenter, and how he had built their house with his own hands. She spoke of her mother only through the recipes she had left behind, each one annotated with notes and suggestions in a handwriting Natalie knew only from those faded pages. One afternoon in late August, Ethan arrived to find her struggling with a ladder, trying to reach a wasp nest that had formed under the eaves. "Stop," he called out, swinging down from his horse. "Let me handle that." "I can do it," she insisted, though the ladder wobbled precariously under her feet. "I know you can, but I am here now so you do not have to." He moved to steady the ladder, looking up at her with concern. "Come down before you fall and break something." Reluctantly, she descended. He took her place, moving up the ladder with confidence and dispatching the nest efficiently. When he came back down, she found herself standing very close to him, close enough to see the golden flecks in his eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "Always happy to help." His voice had dropped lower, and something in his gaze made her heart beat faster. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then a chicken squawked nearby, breaking the spell, and they both stepped back slightly, shy smiles crossing their faces. That evening, after Ethan had left, Natalie stood at her stove stirring another pot of preserves and thinking about the way he had looked at her. She had been proposed to twice since her father's death, both times by men she barely knew who clearly wanted her property more than they wanted her. She had refused without hesitation. But Ethan was different. He had his own work, his own prospects. He asked for nothing and gave freely. And when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that went beyond her property or her domestic skills. He saw her, Natalie, the woman who refused to give up, who worked from dawn to dusk to keep her father's dream alive. The realization that she was developing feelings for him struck her with sudden clarity. She paused in her stirring, considering this new development. It frightened her a little, the vulnerability it represented. She had built walls around her heart after her father's death, focusing solely on survival. But Ethan had somehow slipped past those walls without her noticing. September arrived with cooler nights and golden aspens in the mountains. The harvest was in full swing, and Natalie worked tirelessly to preserve everything she could. Her shelves began to fill with jars of every variety, jewel-toned and beautiful. Ethan continued his visits, but now there was an undercurrent to their interactions, a awareness that had not been there before. Their hands would brush as he helped her carry water, and the touch would linger just a moment too long. Their eyes would meet across the room, and neither would look away as quickly as propriety suggested. One afternoon, she was bottling the last batch of peach preserves when he arrived. She had been working since dawn, and exhaustion made her movements clumsy. She reached for a hot jar without thinking, and pain seared through her palm as the heat burned her skin. She gasped, dropping the jar. It shattered on the floor, sending glass and sticky preserves everywhere. Before she could react, Ethan was beside her, taking her injured hand gently in his. "Cold water," he said, guiding her to the pump. He worked the handle while holding her hand under the stream, his touch careful and sure. "I am fine," she protested, though tears stung her eyes from the pain. "You are hurt." His voice was firm but not unkind. "Let me help." He tore a strip from a clean cloth hanging nearby and wrapped her hand after the cold water had soothed the worst of the burn. His fingers were gentle, his expression focused and concerned. "You work too hard," he said quietly, not releasing her hand even after he had finished bandaging it. "I have to. The harvest will not wait, I know, but you are going to work yourself into exhaustion." He looked up at her, and the worry in his eyes took her breath away. "Let me help more, please. You already help so much, not enough. I hate seeing you push yourself like this." His thumb stroked gently over her uninjured fingers. "I worry about you, Natalie." The way he said her name, soft and full of emotion, made her heart clench. "Ethan, I know you are determined to manage on your own. I respect that. But accepting help does not make you weak. It makes you smart." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "And maybe it would give me an excuse to spend more time with you, which is something I find myself wanting very much." Her breath caught. "Is it?" "It is." He lifted her bandaged hand to his lips, pressing a feather-light kiss to her fingertips. "I have been trying to be respectful, to not assume anything. But the truth is, every day I look forward to seeing you. Every day I find new reasons to admire your strength and your spirit. And I am finding it harder and harder to pretend my feelings are purely friendly." Joy and fear warred in her chest. "My father has only been gone a few months. People will talk. Let them talk. But only if you feel the same way. If you do not, I will respect that and never mention it again." His eyes searched hers. "Do you feel the same way, Natalie?" She thought about lying, about protecting herself from potential hurt. But the hope in his expression, the vulnerability he was showing her, deserved honesty. "I do. I tried not to, but I do." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then we will figure out the rest together." He helped her clean up the broken glass and lost preserves, then insisted she sit down while he finished the bottling. She watched him work, marveling at how naturally he had fit himself into her life, how right it felt to have him in her kitchen. When the last jar was sealed and cooling, he came to sit beside her at the table. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right." What does properly mean? Sunday dinners, chaperoned walks, giving people time to get used to the idea of us together before we make any big decisions. He reached for her good hand, cradling it gently. "I am in no rush, Natalie. I just want to be clear about my intentions." "And what are your intentions?" she asked, though her racing heart suggested she already knew. "To marry you eventually if you will have me, to build a life together, to make sure you never have to carry every burden alone." He squeezed her hand gently. "But like I said, no rush. We will take whatever time you need." She looked at their joined hands, at the calluses on his fingers that matched those on hers, both earned through honest labor. She thought about the empty years stretching ahead if she refused this chance at happiness out of fear or excessive propriety. "I would like that," she said softly. "The courting, I mean, and seeing where it leads." His smile could have lit the darkest night. "Then that is what we will do." True to his word, Ethan courted her with old-fashioned propriety. He came for Sunday dinners, arriving with wildflowers and compliments for her cooking. They took walks through town with Mrs. Henderson or other respectable citizens in clear view. He helped with her work but always left before dark, never giving gossips any ammunition. The town did talk, of course. Some whispered that it was too soon after her father's death. Others suggested that Ethan was after her property. But gradually, as people saw the genuine affection between them, the respect with which he treated her, most of the talk died down or turned approving. October painted the valley in brilliant colors. The harvest was winding down, and Natalie's shelves were stocked full of preserved foods for the winter. Her sales at the general store had been good enough that she made a significant payment on the mortgage, and Mrs. Henderson had mentioned that several restaurants in Salt Lake City were interested in carrying her products. One crisp October afternoon, Ethan arrived with a proposition. "I have been offered a permanent position at the Garrett Ranch," he said. "Good pay, year-round work. I would be staying in the area." Relief and happiness flooded through her. She had been dreading the day he might say he was moving on. "That is wonderful news. There is more." He took her hands in his. "I have been saving my wages. I have enough now to buy some land of my own, start a small ranch. Nothing fancy, but a solid foundation." He paused, his expression turning uncertain. "I know we have only been courting a few months and maybe this is too soon, but I cannot imagine my future without you in it. I love you, Natalie. I think I have loved you since that first day when I saw you covered in plum juice and too stubborn to admit you needed help." Laughter bubbled up through the emotion clogging her throat. "I was a mess that day. You were beautiful." His thumbs stroked over her knuckles. "You are always beautiful. Will you marry me?" She had known this was coming, had been preparing her answer for weeks. But now that the moment was here, she found herself overwhelmed by the enormity of it. Saying yes meant trusting him with her heart, with her future, with the home her father had built. But as she looked into his steady, loving eyes, she realized that trust was already there. He had earned it through actions, not words. Through showing up day after day, through respecting her strength while supporting her struggles, through loving her as she was rather than trying to change her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could hear his heart pounding as fast as her own. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I will spend every day proving you made the right choice," he promised. "You already have." They married in early November in a simple ceremony at the small church in Provo. Mrs. Henderson stood as her witness, and one of Ethan's friends from the ranch stood for him. Natalie wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and carried a bouquet of late-season wildflowers. As she spoke her vows, Natalie felt her father's presence like a warm breeze. She knew he would have approved of Ethan, would have been happy to see her choosing love over solitude. After the ceremony, they hosted a simple reception at her house. Their house now, she corrected herself. Several neighbors brought food, and Mrs. Henderson had made a cake. It was not fancy, but it was filled with genuine warmth and good wishes. As the sun set and the guests departed, Ethan and Natalie stood together on the porch, watching the last golden light fade from the mountains. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Very." She leaned into him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "Though I admit I am a bit nervous. About tonight, about everything. About being a wife, about sharing my space after being alone for so long, about whether I can be what you need." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You are exactly what I need, and I am not worried. We will figure it all out together, just like we have been doing." She smiled up at him. "Together, I like the sound of that." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Ethan held her close and whispered promises into her hair. Promises of partnership and respect, of shared burdens and multiplied joys. She fell asleep feeling safer than she had since her father's death, knowing she was no longer alone. The winter that followed was hard, as winters in Utah Territory always were. But it was also warm in ways that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. Ethan worked at the Garrett Ranch during the day and came home to Natalie each evening. They fell into an easy rhythm, sharing the work of maintaining the homestead, planning improvements for spring. Natalie continued her preserve business, and Ethan began laying the groundwork for his own small cattle operation. They talked late into the night about their dreams, about the life they would build together. He wanted to expand the house, add rooms for the children they both hoped to have. She wanted to plant a proper orchard, rows of fruit trees that would produce for generations. In February, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She told Ethan one snowy evening as they sat by the fire, her heart in her throat. They had been married only 3 months, and part of her worried it was too soon, but his reaction left no room for doubt. He let out a whoop of joy that startled her, then gathered her into his arms and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly, setting her down carefully as if she might break. "I am going to be a father, and I am going to be a mother." The reality of it hit her fully for the first time, bringing tears to her eyes. "Oh, Ethan, I am so happy but also terrified. Me too. But we will figure it out together, just like everything else." He was impossibly gentle with her after that, though she insisted she was not fragile. He still let her work, understanding that she needed to stay active, but he took on more of the heavy tasks. When morning sickness left her exhausted, he brought her dry toast and weak tea. When her back ached from carrying the growing weight, he rubbed it until she fell asleep. Spring arrived with the usual burst of new life. They planted the garden together, Ethan doing the digging while Natalie directed and planted seeds. The fruit trees along the creek bloomed in clouds of white and pink, promising a good harvest. One warm May afternoon, Natalie was preparing to start another round of strawberry preserves when Ethan came home early from the ranch. She looked up in surprise as he entered the kitchen, his expression serious. "Is something wrong?" she asked, alarm spiking through her. "No, nothing is wrong." He moved to her side, taking her hands. "I just had a thought today, and I could not wait to share it with you." "What thought?" He gestured to the counter full of jars and ingredients. "You are about to start preserving again like you do every summer." "And I was thinking about last summer, about meeting you for the first time in this kitchen covered in plum juice, stubborn and beautiful and determined." She laughed softly. "That seems like a lifetime ago." "It does, and yet it was less than a year." He pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of her growing belly. "So much has changed. We have built this life together, this future. And standing there at the ranch today, I suddenly felt overwhelmed by how grateful I am for all of it. For you saying yes when I asked to help, for giving me a chance to be part of your life." "I am the grateful one," she whispered. "You gave me something I did not even know I was missing." "What is that?" "A partner. Someone to share it all with, the struggles and the victories." She placed her hands over his where they rested on her middle. "A family." He kissed her softly, then pulled back with a smile. "I know this might sound strange, but I want to remember this moment exactly as it is. You hear in this kitchen about to bottle preserves in the summer heat, just like when we met. But this time I am here with you and we are waiting for our child and our whole lives are ahead of us." "It is not strange," she said. "I understand completely. This is a happy moment. A perfect one in its way." He glanced around the kitchen, at the jars waiting to be filled, at the sunlight streaming through the window, at her face tilted up toward his. "Preserve this moment with me always," he said softly. "Remember that we built something beautiful from those difficult beginnings." Tears sprang to her eyes, the emotion of pregnancy making her more susceptible to sentiment. "I will. I promise I will always remember this, remember how lucky we are." They stood there holding each other as the afternoon sun painted golden patterns on the floor. Natalie breathed in the scent of him, felt the steady beat of his heart against her cheek, and committed every detail to memory. He was right. This moment was precious, a marker of how far they had come and how bright their future looked. Later, as they worked side by side preparing the strawberries, Natalie found herself smiling. The work that had once represented lonely survival now represented partnership and abundance. Every jar she filled was not just security for the winter, but a testament to the life they were building together. That summer passed in a haze of happiness and anticipation. Natalie's business continued to thrive, and Ethan's careful savings allowed them to purchase a small herd of cattle. They began construction on the addition to the house, working alongside a carpenter friend of Ethan's to add 2 bedrooms and expand the kitchen. In September, just as the autumn harvest was beginning, Natalie went into labor. Mrs. Henderson came to assist, and Ethan paced outside the bedroom door for 12 hours, wearing a path in the floor with his nervous energy. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, he burst into the room without waiting for permission. Natalie lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, and in her arms was a tiny red-faced infant. "A boy," Mrs. Henderson announced with a pleased smile. "A healthy baby boy." Ethan approached slowly as if in a dream. When Natalie held their son out to him, he took the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming openly down his face. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise to take care of you and your mother for as long as I live." They named him Thomas after Natalie's father. Thomas Dalton came into the world with a healthy set of lungs and an appetite to match. The first few months were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and constant feedings. But they were also filled with wonder, watching this tiny person they had created discover the world. Ethan proved to be a devoted father. He would walk Thomas around the house for hours when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until Thomas fell asleep on his shoulder. He changed diapers without complaint and took over the middle of the night feedings when Natalie was too exhausted to rise. As Thomas grew, Natalie gradually returned to her preserve business. She had worried that motherhood would force her to give it up, but Ethan helped her find a balance. He would watch Thomas while she worked, or they would set the baby in a cradle near the stove where she could keep an eye on him while she stirred the pots. By Thomas's first birthday, they had paid off the mortgage entirely. The relief Natalie felt when she made that final payment was overwhelming. The house was truly theirs now, secure and free from debt. That evening they celebrated with a special dinner and toasted their success with glasses of her homemade elderberry wine. "Your father would be so proud of you," Ethan said, raising his glass. "You not only kept his homestead but made it thrive." "We made it thrive," she corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you. We make a good team, the best team." The years that followed brought their share of challenges. There were harsh winters that tested their resources, a year when disease swept through Ethan's cattle herd, moments of doubt and difficulty. But they faced each obstacle together, drawing strength from their partnership. Thomas grew into a bright, curious child with his mother's determination and his father's steady nature. When he was 3, Natalie gave birth to a daughter they named Emma. 2 years after that came another boy, Daniel. The house that had once felt empty and lonely now rang with the sounds of children's laughter and running feet. Natalie's preserve business continued to expand. By the time Thomas was 10, her products were being sold throughout Utah Territory and even into parts of Colorado. She had hired 2 local women to help with the production, and the income it generated was substantial enough that Ethan was able to expand his cattle operation significantly. They became pillars of the Provo community, known for their hard work and generosity. Ethan served on the town council, and Natalie helped establish a school for the growing number of children in the area. They never forgot the struggles of their early days, and they were quick to help newcomers who arrived with more dreams than resources. One summer evening when Natalie was 42 and Ethan was 45, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Their children were grown or nearly so. Thomas was 20, working alongside his father and courting a nice girl from a neighboring ranch. Emma was 17, training to be a teacher. Daniel, at 15, was still finding his way but showed promise as a carpenter. "You ever think about that first summer?" Ethan asked, reaching over to take her hand. "When I knocked on your door covered in trail dust, and you were covered in plum juice." Natalie laughed, the sound rich with decades of shared memories. "I think about it all the time. How close I came to turning you away, how different my life would have been if I had. I almost did not stop that day. I almost just kept riding. But something told me I needed to pay my respects to your father and to check on his daughter." He squeezed her hand gently. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," she corrected with a smile. "The best was asking me to marry you." "Fair point." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. The homestead around them had grown and changed over the years. The original small house was now the heart of a much larger home. The gardens had expanded into a full orchard, just as Natalie had dreamed. Barns and outbuildings dotted the property, housing Ethan's growing cattle operation. But the core of it all, the foundation that everything else was built on, was still that small kitchen where Natalie had bottled preserves in the summer heat, and a cowboy had asked her to preserve a moment with him always. "Did we preserve that moment?" Ethan asked, as if reading her thoughts. Do you remember it as clearly as I do? Every detail, Natalie confirmed. You standing there asking me to remember how lucky we were, how far we had come. I can still see the sunlight on the floor, still feel Thomas moving inside me. It was perfect. It was the beginning of our real life together. Everything before that was just prologue. He turned to look at her, his eyes still the same striking blue-green that had captured her attention all those years ago. And everything after has been the best story I could have imagined. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, because we faced them together, and they made the good parts even sweeter. Natalie leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the deep contentment that came from a life well lived and love well tended. They had worked hard, sacrificed much, and built something lasting. Not just property and business success, but a family rooted in love and respect. A legacy that would continue through their children and grandchildren. The next morning, Natalie was in her large kitchen overseeing the preserve production when Thomas entered with his young lady, Sarah. They had been courting for 6 months, and Natalie had grown fond of the girl's quick smile and practical nature. "Mother, father," Thomas said, his voice formal but excited. "Sarah and I have something to tell you." Ethan looked up from the accounts he was reviewing at the table. "What is it, son?" "I have asked Sarah to marry me, and she said yes." Thomas's face split into a grin. "We wanted you to be the first to know." Natalie felt tears spring to her eyes as she moved to embrace them both. "Oh, I am so happy for you, both of you." Sarah's parents were good people, and the marriage negotiations proceeded smoothly. They planned a wedding for October, after the harvest was complete. Natalie found herself swept up in the preparations, helping Sarah choose fabric for her dress and planning the reception. The wedding day was beautiful, crisp, and clear with aspens blazing gold on the mountainsides. Watching her son speak his vows, Natalie was transported back to her own wedding day, to the promises she and Ethan had made to each other. They had kept those promises through nearly 23 years of marriage, and seeing Thomas embark on the same journey filled her with joy and hope. At the reception, as couples danced and children ran wild with cake-smeared faces, Ethan pulled Natalie onto the makeshift dance floor. "What are you doing?" she laughed. "We are too old to dance." "Nonsense. We are never too old." He swept her into a waltz, moving with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his time on horseback. As they turned around the floor, Natalie caught glimpses of their life reflected in the faces around them. Friends they had known for decades. Their children, healthy and happy. The community they had helped build. And at the center of it all, Ethan, still looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "I love you," she said impulsively. "I do not say it enough anymore, but I do. I love you so much. I love you too. Every single day I love you more." The music swirled around them, and for a moment they were not parents or business owners or community leaders. They were just Natalie and Ethan, the woman who bottled preserves and the cowboy who had asked her to preserve a moment with him always. Winter arrived early that year, bringing heavy snows that isolated the homestead for days at a time. But Natalie and Ethan were prepared, their shelves stocked with food, their barns full of hay for the animals. They spent long evenings by the fire with Emma and Daniel, playing cards and telling stories. Spring came late, but when it finally arrived, it brought news that Thomas and Sarah were expecting their first child. Natalie was going to be a grandmother. The realization struck her with unexpected force. How had so much time passed? How was the baby she had brought into the world now preparing to have a baby of his own? But more than the passage of time, she felt gratitude. Gratitude that she had lived to see this day, that she and Ethan had built something strong enough and good enough to pass on to the next generation. Sarah gave birth in July to a baby girl they named Grace. When Thomas placed his daughter in Natalie's arms, she felt the circle of life completing itself. This tiny person carried forward the legacy of her father, of Natalie and Ethan's love, of all the hard work and hope that had gone into building their family. Ethan stood beside her, one arm around her waist as they gazed down at their granddaughter. "We did it," he whispered. "We built something that will last." "We did," she agreed, "and she will carry it forward and her children after her." The years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren and increasing prosperity. Emma married a teacher from Salt Lake City and moved there, though she visited often. Daniel eventually took over the carpentry business that Natalie's father had started, proving to have his grandfather's skill with wood and tools. Natalie gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of her preserve business, though she still supervised and contributed recipes. The business now employed a dozen women and had become one of the most successful enterprises in the territory. She took pride in knowing that she had not only built a business, but had provided employment and opportunity for other women as well. Ethan, too, began to reduce his workload as age caught up with him. Thomas had taken over most of the ranch operations, proving to be an excellent cattleman. Father and son worked side by side, and Ethan often commented on how blessed he felt to see his son carrying on the work he had started. One August afternoon, Natalie stood in her kitchen preparing a small batch of plum preserves. She was 70 years old now, her hair silver and her hands marked with the spots and wrinkles of age. But her eyes were still sharp, and her movements around the kitchen still sure. Ethan entered, moving more slowly than he once had but still upright and strong. "Plum preserves," he observed with a smile. "Just like that first day I met you. I know. I thought about that this morning and decided it would be fitting." She gestured to the single jar she was filling. "Just one jar, for old time's sake." He moved to stand beside her, watching as she sealed the jar with the practiced ease of someone who had done this thousands of times. The sunlight streamed through the window, painting golden patterns on the floor just as it had all those years ago. "Do you remember what I said that day?" he asked. "When you were pregnant with Thomas and about to start preserving, you said preserve this moment with me always." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And I did. I have carried that moment with me through every day since. It is my touchstone, my reminder of how blessed we are." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We have had a good life, Natalie, better than I ever dreamed possible. The best life." They stood there in the kitchen that had seen so much of their life unfold, holding each other as the summer heat wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. Outside, they could hear their grandchildren playing, 6 of them now ranging in age from Grace at 15 down to little Matthew at 3. "Should we call them in for supper?" Natalie asked eventually. "In a minute. Let me hold you a bit longer." Ethan rested his cheek against her hair. "I never get tired of this, of having you in my arms, of knowing you chose me all those years ago." "It was the easiest choice I ever made," she said honestly. "Even when I was scared and unsure, some part of me knew you were the right person, that we were meant to build this life together." They eventually called the family in for supper, gathering around the long table that had been built to accommodate their growing family. As food was passed and conversations overlapped and children laughed, Natalie caught Ethan's eye across the table. He smiled at her, that same slow, genuine smile that had won her heart decades ago, and she smiled back. After supper, as the family dispersed to various activities, Natalie and Ethan took their customary walk around the property. It was something they had done for years, a way to stay connected to the land and to each other. They walked slowly, pausing often to admire a view or rest on a convenient bench. The orchard was heavy with ripening fruit, promising another abundant harvest. The cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures. Everything spoke of permanence and prosperity, of careful stewardship passed down through generations. "I have been thinking," Ethan said as they stood overlooking the valley spread out below them, "about what comes next." Natalie felt a flutter of concern. "What do you mean?" "I mean that we have built this legacy, this life. Thomas is more than capable of running the ranch, and your business is in good hands with the women you trained. Emma and Daniel are settled and happy." He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "What I am saying is that we have done our work. We have earned the right to simply enjoy what we built. Are you saying you want to retire? I am saying I want to spend whatever years we have left focusing on us. On enjoying our grandchildren, on taking that trip to San Francisco you have always wanted to see, on waking up each morning and deciding what would make us happy that day rather than what needs to be done." He squeezed her hands gently. "We spent our youth building. I want to spend our elder years living." Tears spilled down Natalie's cheeks, but they were happy tears. "That sounds wonderful." And so they did. Thomas and Sarah moved into the main house, taking over its operation, while Natalie and Ethan relocated to a smaller but comfortable house on the property that Daniel built for them. It had a lovely kitchen where Natalie could still make preserves when the mood struck, and a large porch where they could watch the sunset. They took the trip to San Francisco, marveling at the bustling city and the endless ocean. They visited Emma and her family in Salt Lake City regularly. They spent long afternoons with their grandchildren, passing on stories and skills. And they spent quiet evenings together, reading or simply sitting in companionable silence, content in the presence of the person they loved most in the world. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a large celebration. Friends and family came from across the territory to honor them. Speeches were made praising their contributions to the community and their exemplary marriage. Toasts were raised and gifts were presented. But the moment that mattered most to Natalie came at the end of the evening. She and Ethan stood together in their small kitchen, having escaped the celebration for a moment of peace. Through the window, they could see the party continuing, their children and grandchildren celebrating. 50 years, Ethan said wonderingly. Half a century since I married the most stubborn, beautiful woman I ever met. 50 years since I took a chance on a dusty cowboy who showed up at my door. She moved into his arms, fitting against him as naturally as breathing. Best decision I ever made. Do you have any regrets? Anything you wish you had done differently? She considered the question seriously, then shook her head. Not a single one. Every choice, every struggle, every moment of joy led us here, to this life, this family, this love. How could I regret any of it? I feel the same way. He kissed her forehead gently. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for asking. Thank you for seeing me, for respecting my strength while supporting my struggles. Thank you for being exactly who you are. They swayed together slightly, moving to music only they could hear, in the kitchen that held so many memories. Natalie thought about that long ago August afternoon when Ethan had asked her to preserve a moment with him always. She had preserved it, had carried it in her heart through all the years since. But more than that, they had created thousands of other moments just as precious, building a lifetime of preserved memories. Ethan and Natalie lived to see all 6 of their grandchildren grow to adulthood. They saw Grace marry and start a family of her own, making them great-grandparents. They watched as Thomas expanded the ranch into one of the most successful operations in Utah. They took pride in Emma's work as a leader in education reform and in Daniel's beautiful craftsmanship. When Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87, Natalie grieved deeply, but without bitterness. They had been given more than 60 years together, years filled with love and partnership and joy. She held his hand as he slipped away, and her last words to him were the same words she had spoken on their wedding day. "I love you, now and always." She lived 3 more years after his death, surrounded by family and purpose. She spent her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the recipes and techniques that had sustained the family for generations. She told stories of the early days, of a young widow determined to keep her father's homestead and a cowboy who offered help without expectations. On a warm August afternoon, Natalie sat in her kitchen with Grace, now 35 and teaching her own daughter to make preserves. The kitchen smelled of cooking fruit and sugar, a scent that had defined Natalie's life. "Tell me again about grandfather," Grace asked, as she often did. "About how you met." Natalie smiled, her weathered face lighting up with memory. "It was a day much like this. Hot summer, fruit to preserve, and me thinking I had to do everything alone." She watched her great-granddaughter carefully stirring a pot under Grace's supervision. "Your grandfather showed up covered in trail dust, offering to help fix my chicken coop. I almost turned him away out of pride." "But you did not." "No, I did not. And that made all the difference." Natalie reached over to adjust the heat under the pot. "He taught me that accepting help is not weakness. That partnership makes us stronger, not weaker. That love is not about losing yourself, but about finding yourself reflected in someone else's eyes." "You really loved him," Grace said softly, "with everything I had." "Every single day, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones." Natalie looked at her granddaughter with eyes that held the wisdom of a long, well-lived life. "That is what I want you to remember, Grace. That real love is not just the butterflies and excitement, though those are wonderful. Real love is choosing each other every day. It is working side by side through difficulties. It is building something together that neither of you could build alone." Later that evening, Natalie stood alone in her kitchen, running her hand over the old wooden counter where she had prepared so many thousands of jars of preserves. The sun was setting, painting the room in golden light, just as it had on that afternoon when Ethan asked her to preserve a moment with him always. She had preserved it. More than that, she had lived it fully, squeezing every drop of joy and meaning from the life they had built together. And now, feeling the weight of her years and the weariness in her bones, she was ready to join him. Natalie passed away peacefully in her sleep that night, a smile on her face. They buried her next to Ethan in the small cemetery outside Provo, under a tree they had planted together 40 years earlier. The headstone read simply, "Natalie Owens Dalton, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend." But for those who knew her story, no words were needed. Her legacy lived on in the family she had built, in the business she had started, in the countless lives she had touched. It lived on in her grandchildren's laughter and her great-grandchildren's determination. It lived on in the recipes passed down through generations, each jar of preserves a connection to the woman who had started it all. And most of all, it lived on in the story told around family tables for generations after. The story of a young widow who refused to give up, and a cowboy who offered his heart. The story of 2 people who chose to build a life together, preserving not just fruit in jars but moments in time, creating a love that would echo through all the years to come. In the end, Ethan's request had come true. That August moment in the kitchen, with the summer heat wrapping around them and their whole future ahead, had been preserved, not just in memory but in the life they built, in the family they raised, in the love that lasted far beyond their mortal years. They had taken that single perfect moment and stretched it across a lifetime, creating something beautiful and enduring that would never truly end. And in the hearts of those who knew their story, the moment lived on forever. A young woman bottling preserves in the summer heat, and a cowboy asking her to preserve that moment with him always. A request she had honored not just in remembering but in living, creating a legacy of love that would last through all the generations to come.